Listen to me closely. Turn off the notifications on your phone. Lock your bedroom door and look around your room. You feel safe, right? Your home is supposed to be your sanctuary. A place where the monsters from the outside world can't reach you. But what happens when the monster has the keys to your front door? What happens when the monster is the one cooking your meals, buying your clothes, and tucking you in at night? In America, we talk a lot about tough love. We joke about tiger moms and strict parents pushing their kids to get straight A's, make the varsity team, or get into an Ivy League school. But there is a line where ambition rots and turns into an obsession. And when you cross that line, you don't find success. You find a living, breathing hell. Let me tell you about Nozomi. Let me show you what happens when the pressure doesn't create a diamond, but instead creates a nightmare. Nozomi didn't grow up in a haunted house. She grew up in a very normal, middle-class apartment in Japan. But to her, it was a maximum security prison with invisible bars. Her warden was her mother, Shinobu. Shinobu was a woman hollowed out by her own failures. She was surrounded by wealthy, highly educated relatives, doctors and surgeons who looked down on her. So, she decided that Nozomi wasn't going to be just a daughter. Nozomi was going to be her revenge on the world. Nozomi was going to be a doctor at a prestigious national university, no matter what it took. From the moment Nozomi showed a tiny spark of intelligence, her childhood was abruptly canceled. There were no playdates. There were no cell phones. There were no sleepovers, no hobbies, no privacy. There was only the living room desk, illuminated by a harsh, buzzing fluorescent lamp. Shinobu quit her job, just so she could stand behind Nozomi's chair, hour after hour, day after day. She was a phantom floating just outside the circle of light. Her silhouette cast like a jagged claw across Nozomi's textbooks. She didn't speak with love, she spoke in corrections. A red pen in Shinobu's hand wasn't just a writing tool. It was a scalpel, leaving bleeding marks over Nozomi's imperfect answers. A score of 95% was a catastrophic failure. A minor mistake was a sin that required immediate, brutal punishment. You might think I'm exaggerating about the abuse. Let me take you to an evening when Nozomi was in the 8th grade. She had taken a math test and made a stupid, careless mistake. Terrified of the shadow that hovered behind her chair, Nozomi took a pencil and tried to alter the grade on the paper. It was a desperate act of a scared child. But Shinobu found out. The mother didn't just yell. She walked calmly into the kitchen and filled the kettle. Nozomi sat at the table, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird, listening to the water boil. A high, shrieking whistle pierced the air. Shinobu brought the boiling kettle to the living room. Without a word, without a flicker of emotion in her eyes, she poured the scalding water directly onto Nozomi's bare thighs. Nozomi's screams echoed off the apartment walls, but nobody came to help. Her flesh blistered, turning a sick, angry red, the pain radiating through her entire nervous system. She collapsed to the floor, begging for a hospital. Sit back down, Shinobu whispered, her voice like a dry rustle of dead leaves. You do not leave this chair until you correct every single mistake on this test. Nozomi sat there, crying in agony, forcing her trembling fingers to hold the pencil and solve algebraic equations, while her skin practically melted. When it was finally over, Shinobu took her to the emergency room. Before they walked through the hospital doors, Shinobu gripped Nozomi's arm, her fingernails digging into the bruises. Tell the doctors you were clumsy and spilled your own hot tea, she hissed. Or we do this again. Nozomi lied. The doctors nodded, and the monster won. You might be asking, where was the father? How could a man let his child be tortured? The father was a ghost, a weak, passive shadow of a man who couldn't stand the suffocating atmosphere of his own home. He heard the screaming. He saw the bruises. He knew exactly what his wife was doing. One rainy night, when Nozomi was just a kid, she heard the sound of a zipper from the master bedroom. She peeked through the crack in the door and saw her father packing a duffel bag. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Nozomi's eyes pleaded with him. Take me with you. Please. Don't leave me in the cage with her. But her father looked away. He muttered something about moving into the company dormitory for work. He zipped the bag, walked out the front door, and never came back to live with them. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place that night was the sound of the cage being permanently sealed. Nozomi was entirely alone with the monster. Time stopped having meaning. Years weren't measured by birthdays or holidays. They were measured by entrance exams. When Nozomi graduated high school, she failed the entrance exam for Kyoto University's medical program. Shinobu's pride couldn't handle it. She forced Nozomi to lie to her grandmother, pretending she had been accepted. And then, she forced Nozomi into a grueling cycle of taking the exams. Not for 1 year. Not for 2. But for 9 consecutive years. 9 years of waking up, studying until her eyes bled, failing the impossible standard, and being punished. Nozomi was entirely cut off from human contact. When smartphones became popular, she wasn't allowed to have one. When she begged for a moment of peace, Shinobu installed a GPS tracker on her to monitor her every step if she ever left the house for a tutoring center. The psychological torture grew more bizarre and intimate. Shinobu stopped letting Nozomi bathe alone. They had to be in the bathtub at the same time, shoulder to shoulder in the suffocating steam. So Nozomi wouldn't have even 5 minutes of privacy to think her own independent thoughts. The mother was infecting the daughter's mind, acting like a parasite trying to take over the host. On one particularly dark night, after another failed exam, Shinobu brought a sewing needle to the desk. She grabbed Nozomi's hand, forced her finger onto the wood, and jabbed the needle deep into the flesh.
Write it,
Shinobu commanded, watching the blood well up from the wound. Nozomi had to use her own blood as ink, smearing it across a white piece of paper. I will study hard. I will pass the exam. She was signing a contract with the devil, written in her own DNA. She tried to run away. Twice. She packed a small bag and ran into the neon, lit streets of the city, breathing the sweet, intoxicating air of freedom. But both times, Shinobu called the police, playing the role of the terrified, loving mother looking for her mentally unstable daughter. The police always brought her back. They handed the runaway prey right back to the predator. Nozomi developed learned helplessness. She realized there was no escape. The outside world wouldn't save her. The police wouldn't save her. The only way out was for one of them to stop breathing. Finally, a compromise was made. After 9 years of purgatory, Shinobu allowed Nozomi to enroll in a nursing program at a local medical university. With one strict condition, she had to become a certified midwife. It was a respected title. It carried prestige. But Nozomi didn't want to be a midwife. For the first time in her life, she had found something she genuinely loved. She wanted to be a surgical nurse. She was good at it. She even secretly secured a job offer at a hospital. The taste of true independence was just weeks away. Then came December 2017. Nozomi failed the midwifery certification exam. When Shinobu found out, the apartment didn't just get cold. It felt like all the oxygen was sucked out of the room. Shinobu lost her mind. She dragged Nozomi to the floor by her hair. She confiscated the cheap smartphone Nozomi had finally been allowed to buy. Shinobu forced her 31-year-old daughter to kneel on the hard wooden floor. She turned on the phone's camera and hit record, screaming at Nozomi to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, calling her a worthless, ungrateful parasite. Then, Shinobu walked to the patio, found a heavy concrete brick, and brought it back inside. She placed the phone on the ground and smashed it over and over again until the screen was nothing but glittering, jagged dust. "You are not taking that surgical nursing job," Shinobu spat, sliding a piece of paper across the floor. "Sign this. A contract. You will stay here. You will study again. You are mine." The job was supposed to start in just a week. It was Nozomi's only life raft, and her mother had just set it on fire, smiling while it burned. January 19th, 2018. The apartment was eerily quiet. Nozomi had spent the day begging, pleading on her hands and knees for her mother to let her go to work. Shinobu had just laughed, throwing insults like rocks. Selfish, disgusting, a failure. After hours of screaming, Shinobu was exhausted. She lay down on the floor of the living room and demanded Nozomi give her a massage. Nozomi sat beside the woman who had stolen 3 decades of her life. She needed the tight muscles in her mother's shoulders. Slowly, the rhythmic breathing signaled that Shinobu had fallen into a deep sleep. Nozomi looked down at the sleeping face. She didn't see a mother. She saw a creature. A shadow with too many limbs that had wrapped itself around her throat since the day she was born. Nozomi stood up. The floorboards didn't creak. She walked into the kitchen. The fluorescent light buzzed quietly. She opened the drawer, and her fingers wrapped around the cold, heavy handle of a sharp kitchen knife. She walked back into the living room. Her heart wasn't racing. Her hands weren't shaking. For the first time in 31 years, her mind was completely, terrifyingly clear. It was like solving a math equation where the variables finally made sense. If I remove this variable, I equal freedom. She knelt beside her mother. She raised the blade, and with a single, practiced, surgical motion, she brought the knife down, sinking it deep into the left side of Shinobu's neck, severing the carotid artery. Blood sprayed across the textbooks. It coated the walls. Shinobu's eyes snapped open in sheer shock, gargling on her own blood, trying to speak, trying to command her daughter one last time. But the vocal cords were sliced. The monster was drowning in its own venom. Nozomi watched the life leave her mother's eyes. And do you know what she felt? Not panic, not remorse. Relief. A beautiful, floating, weightless relief. She walked to her mother's computer, logged onto Facebook, and typed a single status update. I finally defeated the monster. I can rest now. Then, she walked back into the living room, gently draped a warm blanket over her mother's lifeless, bloody corpse, went into her bedroom, and fell into the most peaceful, uninterrupted sleep of her entire life. The next few weeks were a bizarre macabre comedy. Nozomi felt so free that she turned on the television, a device she had been banned from using for a decade. She sat on the couch, laughing at variety shows, while her mother's body began to rot in the next room. When the smell became too strong, Nozomi didn't panic. She went to the hardware store, bought a saw, and methodically dismembered the woman who gave her birth. She didn't do it in a frenzy. She did it calmly, tossing the smaller pieces into the city's combustible trash bags, and burying the torso and head in a shallow grave near the Yasu River. She even used her mother's phone to text relatives, pretending Shinobu was still alive and well, nagging about groceries and weather. And the next week, Nozomi put on her scrubs, walked out the front door, and officially started her job as a surgical nurse. She was eventually caught, of course. The crows found the shallow grave by the river. The police found the inconsistencies in her story. The DNA matched. When the police slapped the handcuffs on her wrists, Nozomi didn't cry. In fact, later, when a reporter visited her in the detention center, Nozomi smiled warmly through the plexiglass. You know, she told the reporter, her voice light and airy, life inside this prison is so much better than my home. Here, the guards tell you the rules, and as long as you follow them, they leave you alone. Nobody screams at me. Nobody tells me I'm worthless. I finally have peace. The courts, in a rare move, actually understood her torture. Recognizing the severe, educational abuse she endured, they reduced her sentence on appeal to just 10 years. She will be a free woman soon. The lingering question, Nozomi wrote letters from her prison cell, begging society to look closer at the closed doors of their neighbors. To recognize that sometimes, the most violent abuse leaves no physical bruises, but instead destroys the soul of a child in the name of love and academic success. But as you sit there in your room, listening to the quiet hum of your own house, I want you to think about something. They locked Nozomi away, and they buried what was left of her mother. The case is closed. But trauma like that, it doesn't just evaporate into the air. It burrows deep into the DNA. It changes you on a cellular level. When Nozomi finally gets out of that prison, she will be a middle-aged woman, stepping into a world she has never truly known. A world full of expectations, pressures, and failures. She says she defeated the monster that night. She says she killed it with that kitchen knife. But if you look closely at the darkness in the corner of your room, you have to ask yourself, can you ever really kill the monster? Or did the monster simply crawl out of the mother's bleeding neck and find a new home inside the daughter? Sleep well tonight. And whatever you do, don't fail your next test.